Well, after an off week, we are back here on Head to Head. Mike Johnson, Simone Eli joining you for one of the most anticipated weeks of college football, at least since the new SEC schedule and format was released. It's top 5 matchup in Tuscaloosa as Alabama welcomes in Georgia. Let's talk all things Dogs and Tide. Let's go head to head. All right, guys, super excited to be back on here today with Mike Johnson as we preview the big one, a night game at Bryant-Denny Stadium on Saturday. Alabama and Georgia going head-to-head. Of course, the first edition of this kind of new reclaimed rivalry, if you will, without Nick Saban, the new era of college football. This is one we've been looking forward to. We can safely say that for sure. It's going to be an exciting one there in Tuscaloosa.
Yeah, it's funny you lead with the word rivalry. I think that's been one of the talking points over here in Atlanta throughout the week is this a rivalry? Some people think it is. Some people think, they don't play it often enough. The stakes are high. The stakes are always high in this game. Yep. But look, I think equally, Simone, the kind of 10,000-foot view is that the stakes seem equally high on both sides. Bama wants to reclaim its dominance, even with Kalen DeBoer at the helm. And the Georgia fans and Kirby Smart and that entire fan base are like, Kirby Smart has to get over the Alabama hump, and now that Nick Saban's gone, now's the time. So it's going to be very, very interesting to see the way this one plays out on Saturday night.
Yeah, and it's certainly going to be the battle of two powerful forces. When you look at Alabama, a huge dominant program has now turned into this high-flying, just incredible offensive attack that we've seen kind of develop there in Tuscaloosa more recently. While Georgia, they've been able to be that defensive dominant program while also scoring a lot of points, which of course has led to back-to-back titles for Kirby Smart a couple of years ago. But there's no question that right now they're among, if not the best defense in the country. When you look at this matchup from the two powerful forces that we're dealing with, who has the edge? Does anybody have the edge?
That's a good question. I don't know that anybody does have the edge. I think that there is something to be taken away. The fact that Georgia has already seen Jalen Milroe in the flesh and has played him in person, as have many of the SEC teams that will play them this year. But it's not like it's the same system. It's not the same scheme. They're not even running the same defense, right? This is a completely different team schematically over in Alabama. And on the flip side, there are a lot of missing pieces for Georgia as well. There's a lot of new players at the skill positions, new players at the running back position. I think it's easy to just say that Carson Beck is back and, Mike Bobo is back and some of the other pieces there. But they're not really the same team either. They've had to kind of put some new pieces in place as they move through this season too. And not only that, but I think, if you just look at 2 weeks ago and look at their performance against Kentucky, I think you'd say, well, the defense isn't that great. They were missing a couple of starters in that game, and I think that's going to be a story of this one as well as they continue to get healthy throughout the weekend.
Yeah, Mike, being based there in Georgia, you kind of are balancing this game and these two fan bases, and I know that you've done several shows all week. What is the temperature like there for this Dogs team who feels slighted from a year ago? This is a team who probably should have been in the college football playoff, given that they were coming off 2 titles. Of course, they missed out. Alabama had a heavy hand in that, of course, beating them in the SEC title game. When you think about this fan base and, of course, wanting to see Kirby get over the hump, what is the temperature as this team travels to Tuscaloosa? It'll be a tough place to play. It's going to be, this is the game of the century type games that we talk about, that we see, just every few years. This is certainly it.
Yeah, it definitely is. And I think the word that I've used for Georgia's fan base all week is hungry. They seem hungry. And obviously they take a lot of pride as a football program, as they should. They are in the midst of a dynasty. It's the greatest run in the history of Georgia football right now. The only thorn in their side has been Alabama football. You look at all the losses they've had the last few years, aside from Florida, 4 years ago. It's been Alabama, and there's no doubt about that. And so I think that they're just hungry. I think that they're tired of hearing the Alabama, answer when it comes. And Alabama's in that program from the West. It's a new era of college football. It's a new era in Alabama. It's a new era in terms of transfer portal and NIL and all these coaches and everything else. Mm-hmm. Georgia wants to remain on top. And I think in order to do that, at some point, you do have to get over this Alabama hump. And I think they smell blood in the water when it comes to Kalen DeBoer finally being in Tuscaloosa. So, I've talked to people on both sides, obviously, all week, like you said, and it seems like Georgia fans just hungry. I think there's some tension. I think there's tension on both sides. But you don't really know what you're going to get Saturday night until that ball's kicked off.
It's a good point. For the first time since I think '07, I might have read Alabama is a home underdog. Of course, doesn't mean they haven't lost at home. We know that teams have come into Bryant-Denny recently. Think about the LSU, fantastic team, and Joe Burrow of the like, beating Alabama in Tuscaloosa. But they are the home underdog. I'm not really sure how much players even really put into that as much as maybe the media do, and certainly the people that put their money on games like this. But when you look at a guy like Jalen Milroe and what he has been able to prove, that he can hurt you in the air with his feet. I mean, he really has come into his own, and you can tell with the whole Lank mentality, they want to go out there and prove that they are supreme in the SEC with or without Nick Saban. How do you feel like he is? I don't know, factor isn't even a word, but isn't even the right word for him. But how do you feel like he is maybe the main factor, so to speak, in this game that can be the difference maker in terms of the Tide having success offensively?
Yeah, I think if you're a Georgia fan and you're looking at this game and you're breaking it down and you're part of that coaching staff and you're saying, well, Jalen Milroe doesn't hit the intermediate balls. He doesn't throw across the middle a bunch. He's not, that great as far as breaking tackles, which is kind of crazy to me because he's built like a Mack truck.
Sure.
It's at Georgia, you have to kind of pick your poison. Do you want him to throw deep? Because usually you make the quarterbacks throw deep, right? But Jalen Milroe has been so good on the deep ball. It's almost like you just need to back everybody off and force him to make the intermediate throws. And hopefully maybe one of those is overthrown. Maybe one of those is tipped. The problem is that when you look at it from an Alabama perspective and really what Nick Sheridan and Kalen DeBoer have done, they have bought into Jalen Milroe, the runner. Right? It's almost like they don't even need to throw it as much as they used to because he is so good at running the ball. And it's not just zone read the way you saw last year in the SEC championship game. It's counter, it's power, it's speed sweep, it's empty the backfield and run strictly Jalen. Let's put 5 wide receivers on the field. Let's line them up as close to the sideline we can, and let's see what kind of spacing we're going to get from Georgia's defense. So there are highs and lows to Jalen Milroe as a quarterback. I think he's very good. And I think the same thing about Carson Beck on the other side of the field. There's good, there's bad, there's highs, there's lows, there's strengths, there's weaknesses. And I think it's all about these defenses forcing these quarterbacks into particular situations, given the situation in the game on Saturday night.
When you look at this Georgia team, because I want to talk about Carson Beck, obviously a lot of the attention is going to go to the defense. Georgia hasn't given up an actual touchdown. Of course, they've given up some points, but all in the way of a field goal. Carson Beck maybe doesn't get the amount of love, I guess, maybe so to speak, as maybe he should. But this is still a guy who is veteran. Where do you see where he is at right now in terms of his confidence as he goes into a game like this and wanting to prove that we are the powerhouse program that we've seen in the past few years? We're going to run the table in the SEC.
Well, I think, first of all, let me explain that from where I'm sitting over here in Atlanta, Georgia. I think there's a lot of people that thought there maybe was a good chance that Carson Beck could pull off the trifecta this year. And that's first overall draft pick, that's Heisman Trophy winner, that's national champion. I think he looks uncomfortable, to be quite honest with you. And that's not going to be helped with the loss of right guard Tate Ratledge after last week's game against Kentucky. He goes out with a high ankle sprain. He actually gets the tightrope procedure that Tua Tagovailoa got a couple of years ago at the Alabama program. So they won't have Tate Ratledge. That is a day one NFL starter, and Tate Ratledge, they won't have it right guard. And the depth after him, not as good as you might think at a program like Georgia. So that is going to be a factor. I think the tackles have struggled in this offense. Carson Beck has not really had a chance to get comfortable in the pocket. And I don't think that Georgia right now, and I think any Georgia fan would probably tell you this, I don't think they have the skill players that they're used to having. Ladd McConkey's out. Brock Bowers is obviously both those guys run to the NFL. I don't know that any of the receivers in particular have stepped up. Now, you do have a good running back position. I think they'll lean on that as well. But Carson Beck probably to this point in the year hasn't looked like you kind of hoped he would. I think he'll probably be looking to settle into this game against Bama's defense.
When you look at the Alabama offensively and talk about explosive plays, that's a lot of what it's been, especially via Ryan Williams. And if he's the youngest guy in college football, in case you never heard that on the broadcast. I feel like we hear that every single second. But when you look at what he's been able to do, everything has been explosive. And honestly, that's what he was in high school. And I don't know if that's just because he can just beat guys down the field, if he's just that type of guy. In my opinion, that's just the type of player that he is. And so what that does, though, is, of course, it keeps you honest. You know that he is a guy that can immediately change a game. He can, sudden change is what we've seen throughout the season so far with Alabama when he has been throwing the ball. When you look at the playmakers on that side and you look at this Georgia defense who hasn't given up maybe more than a few 20-plus yard plays all season, what what gives? What do we see on Saturday? Something's got to give. Is this something where, hey, for the first time we see, Ryan not getting away from guys, or we see Alabama having to get creative? Because surely things have been kept in the bag going into this week. You coming off a bye week, you have extra time to prepare. I mean, we can see some things we maybe haven't seen.
Yeah, I think we definitely will. I think they'll be challenged in a way they haven't seen it. And don't be shocked if Ryan Williams' numbers this week aren't what they were. And I think that there's going to be a lot of focus on him, Simone. I think when you line things up, let's not forget that Alabama does still have a number of other very talented receivers. Ryan Williams is kind of taking the headlines due to the fact that he is 17. And you mentioned Bama hasn't been a home underdog right since 2007 when he was born, right? So that's kind of been one of the other things that comes away from it. But I still look at Jeremy Bernard, Kobe Prentice, some of those other guys involved in that passing game, and I think they can do some of the same things. I think it's going to be interesting to see what Kalen DeBoer does in terms of backfield action, in terms of motions, because I do think that if you're looking at Ryan Williams, you walk up, you try to press him, you try to be physical with him, you don't let him just streak down the field. The problem is that you're in man press, all of a sudden you're turning your back to Jalen Milroe, and if he can follow you down the field running, then it becomes a very dangerous thing as well. So Kalen DeBoer's got his hands full in terms of what they'll be asking him to do this weekend.
We never got a chance to really talk about the Wisconsin game, and I don't want to go back and beat the bush on that. I mean, obviously, 42-10 was the final there. Was there anything that you learned about this team into that week 3 game that maybe you were looking to be answered coming out of South Florida, which looked more impressive on the scoreboard than it actually was there at Bryant-Denny?
Well, I learned something about Kalen DeBoer. I can tell you that. I mean, there was a point in that game with 30 seconds left in the half that if Nick Saban had been on that sideline, you'd have seen them kneel on the ball and be happy to have the lead that they have going into halftime. Not for Kalen DeBoer. He airs it out, hits an explosive to Ryan Williams. Then one play later, he hits, I think, Jeremy Bernard in the end zone, and they scored another touchdown. So it's a completely different school of thought in terms of what we looked at this program. Nick Saban playing into his defense, playing into ball control, playing into making sure they got these long, sustained drive. Kalen DeBoer is like, dude, if I can hit you now, I'm going to hit you now, right? We might as well get all the points we can and get this scoreboard lit up. So that's an interesting thing. And I think we thought a lot about Wisconsin, especially when Tyler Van Dyke was playing the quarterback position. He gets hurt. I don't know if you can take as much away from that game as we probably hoped we could. But nonetheless, that defense and that offense competed at a very high level up there. So you give them kudos for that. I'm just not sure, Simone, how much we can actually take away when you're going to line up against a team the caliber of Georgia on Saturday.
Yeah, it'll be a night game, like I mentioned off the top of the show, a 6:30 p.m. kick there at Bryant-Denny. We've seen Alabama throughout this season maybe not start the way that they would have liked. Even at Wisconsin, it wasn't exactly like, hey, scoring in the first 3 first 3 drives, or, South Florida, of course, we know what that looked like for most of the first half. How significant, and can you really even overstate how important it will be to come out into this game and to make your mark on both sides of the ball for either team, but most especially Georgia when you're coming on the road at Bryant-Denny? I mean, they'll just, suck the energy out of you just from a fan base perspective. You certainly know that the team is going to, put their, foot on your throat if they can down the stretch. But how significant will it be for one of these teams to pretty much come in and say, hi, this is ours to take, and we've arrived?
Well, I think it goes both ways, right? I think if you're Alabama, you want the crowd to be raucous. You want your crowd to be able to affect Georgia, and therefore, if you're the offense, let's put some points on the board early. Let's score. Let's keep this this crowd into the game. I am sure, especially at this point, now that they do serve a little bit of alcohol in Bryant-Denny Stadium, that these fans will be ready to go on Saturday night. On the flip side, if you're Carson Beck, if you're Georgia, if you're that offensive line, ETN, some of the other skill players they have, let's take the crowd out of it. Let's kind of, let's pound the ball. Let's 4 or 5 yards in a cloud of dust, maybe a couple slants, some curls, some back shoulder throws, and let's see if we can kind of get this crowd sitting on their hands for a little bit. I think that's going to be an important factor for them as well. I expect it to be a heavyweight fight, though. I think one team will land a blow early, one will come back and land a left hook, and you'll just kind of see them spar back and forth much in the way they have the last time they've matched up. It's always a heavyweight fight. I don't think the crowd will be taken out of it at any point, but if Georgia can just quiet them down a little bit, it will factor in on Saturday for sure.
Before we get to predictions, Mike, I want your one key. If there's the key to success for Alabama when you go into this matchup that you feel good about, if the Tide is able to be successful in this regard, they'll come out with a win in week 5. What is that key? What is the point of emphasis for Kalen DeBoer coming off this bye week and going into this top 5 matchup?
Well, I think it's two things. First of all, this is going to be a very talented Georgia defensive front. Let's not forget about that. I think, like I said earlier, I think you look at the Kentucky game and you say, well, they're not that good up front. Michael Williams will be back. A number of other players will be back probably in this game. I expect them to be healthy, and I expect them to play. So when you look at the way that, Elijah Pritchett and that group up front will be able to control the line of scrimmage, run the ball, take it into your hands, pound it down the field. I personally, at this point, if they're fully healthy, I think Bama's the best offensive line in the country. So I think that is one thing that plays into it factors in that decision. The second thing is you are young on the back end. That is an older group, although I don't think they're as good as they have been in the past. It's an older group of receivers and skill players from Georgia, and you also have a very good quarterback. So you have to be able to communicate on the back end. I think that's going to be of the utmost importance on Saturday night, no matter what the crowd looks like. Can these freshmen, can these younger players at Alabama in the secondary communicate with one another, know all their assignments, and man up on the back end and not allow Georgia's skill players to kind of have this game as a game they plant their flag in the ground? So that's two things for me. I'm looking at the secondary. I'm looking at the offensive line. Hopefully those two groups can carry this team to victory.
I like it. Good stuff, Mike. When you think about what this game will look like when it hits 000s at Bryant-Denny, you mentioned you think this could be a back and forth affair a little bit. You've mentioned what you feel like will be the key aspects for Alabama. Georgia wants to prove a point. They're the second ranked team in the country. Alabama is 4th. They are the underdog at home for the first time in a hot minute. What does this game look like when it ends on Saturday night?
Well, I think first and foremost, I'll give you my score in a second, but I do have to say this is such a different feel to this game because of the 12-team playoff. When these teams have matched up in the past, it almost felt like an elimination game, and it was. It did end up being an elimination game last year. Obviously, the national title before that and the SEC champions and the other national titles before that. It's been crazy to watch over the years. But it will, even if you do lose either side, it's like it stings a little bit less, although you don't want to lose to either team. I think this one looks a lot like the SEC championship game a year ago. I'm going to go 31-21 Alabama. I think that instead of Georgia scoring late to get it closer, I think that Bama scores a field goal late with the Lou Groza winner at kicker, and I think they pull away by a double-digit lead. I just think that Jalen Milroe, as bought in as Kalen DeBoer is, and Jalen Milroe, the runner, I think that he can really have a good day. Georgia has the pocket passer in Carson Beck, and as good as he is at what he does, the X factor is Jalen Milroe's legs. I think they use that to their advantage. I think Kalen DeBoer is the better offensive mind in this matchup, and I think that this is going to be just another chapter in one of these heavyweight fights for these two teams.
I think I'm similar, and when it comes to score, I do think that the Kirby Smart factor plays a role. I mean, this is a guy who he doesn't want to say that it's, he doesn't want to talk about Nick Saban. He doesn't want to talk about Alabama. He wants to make it about Georgia. Every time anyone asks about that, he gets his panties in a wad. There's no question. He always has. At least he got rid of the bull cut for the most part. But when he entered, I just feel like every time that these two match up, he is just a little. He's just on one. That's the best way. That's what the young people say. He's on one a little bit. And with that, I think that what it looks like in the locker room in terms of hyping up his guys looks different as well. I do think this will be a close game down the stretch. I like a 28-24, something similar, one-score game where Alabama really does have to hold off back down the stretch and try to shut down Georgia. I mean, do I want to see that? I mean, no. I mean, but kind of yes. I mean, college football. This is what you sign up for. I mean,
no, I know. I just want. Honestly, can I just have a simple Saturday night where I can just, you know what I mean? Not all the stress. Can we just let's not have a stressful one, right? Let's just get an easy win.
That's the thing. It's like you want to see that, but it's also like, wow, you're pulling your hair out, not knowing how it's going to turn out. But I do think Alabama comes away with the win. I think that they're playing really good football right now. It's at home. That's certainly helpful, of course. But like you said, it does have a way different feel now that there are no divisions in the SEC. The door is still going to remain open for these two teams to win an SEC title. Everything still lies ahead of you, and that will be whoever loses this game. That will be the first thing out of their mouth in the post-game press conference. But make no mistake, nobody wants to lose this one either. So.
I will say, and I gave you my projected score at 31-21. Here's another projection for you. I think these two teams will play again at some point this year. I was going to say that. I didn't know if it was too strong.
I didn't know if it was too strong to say, but I feel it. I just wasn't sure if I wanted to actually put my name on that. But
I'm doing it. Stamp me down, mark it down. These two teams will match up again. No matter what happens on Saturday in Bryant-Denny, these two teams somewhere, sometime, and in some game will match up at some other point this season. I promise.
Well, with the expanded playoff and new SEC format, you never know what it will look like. Texas will certainly try to have an opinion about all of that, though.
That's
we
fair.
Can't wait. It's going to be a good one. A 6:30 kickoff at Bryant-Denny Stadium. It's been fun, Mike. Looking forward to recapping this. I know Bama fans will be on the edge of their seat, no question, all evening. So, guys, thanks so much for tuning in to Head to Head. For Mike Johnson, I'm Simone Eli, and we'll see you next week.
Brought to you by Alabama Beef Farmers and Ranchers.